Welcome to Uncover the Human, where every conversation revolves around enhancing all the connections in our lives.
Whether that's with our families, co-workers, or even ourselves.
When we can be our authentic selves, magic happens. This is Alex Cullimore.
And this is Cristina Amigoni.
Let's dive in. Welcome back to this episode of Uncover the Human. It's Cristina and I today here just to react to the general state of the world. We are recording this as our first podcast post-election, which was and is traumatizing. So we're just going to go with that.
Yes. And given that word, it should be a good preview for anybody that doesn't actually want to listen to this.
Yes.
Or know our
so
opinion.
You can guess our political leanings right now. And
exactly.
That's the problem. That's fine. You can skip this episode, or you can listen and see if you learn something.
Yes.
about why this is hard to take.
Which was actually really interesting. I just that reminded me that I think the day after the election results, or I don't know, a couple of days, sometime last week, it's all very foggy. It was snowing. It was gray. It felt like Groundhog Day because the snow wouldn't stop, and it was the same cycle every single day. So at some point last week, I was talking to a client who actually shared that part of what it was a coaching session. So part of what was going on with them at the moment was just the election results and the election week. But because we hadn't openly declared our political views, it was
tiptoeing conversation.
It was very hard to provide acknowledgement and validation, but not know how far to go, because it was really more of a like, are you grieving or are you celebrating? I want to lean towards grieving when somebody says, like that's part of what keeps me up at night is the elections.
It's probably not just out of jubilation.
Yes.
I just can't get myself to sleep. I'm so worked up.
Oh, and I've had the same situation actually with my therapist, where without even going down, she actually did a fantastic job. I wish I had had that session before I was in the same position with other people, because she did a fantastic job at not having to actually establish where we stood personally, to then still be able to create the space and talk through what is it that you're processing, what concerns you. And I'm pretty sure I know where she stands, given the questions she was asking and some of the things that she was bringing up. But I was very grateful for how well she did navigating that space and giving it, she was willing to give it a whole hour. And we just took 15, 20 minutes, and I was like, okay, I think we can move on to the next thing.
Yeah. It is interesting how much of life kind of is like that currently, especially with news like the election. It's something so like large and yet so distant from our day-to-day experience immediately. I mean, it's not that it won't affect us continually, but it is the initial shock of it is something that is kind of distant. And it is something that is, I mean, the shock is very present, but the actual impact is not immediate. And it's something I've noticed over the last week too, is that it does take some acknowledgement, and it's worth sitting a bit with, but it doesn't take too much to feel like, okay, but here's all the other things that are also going on much more close to home, much more close to, my existence, my whatever I'm currently worried about.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. One of the things that actually did help me not feel completely hopeless and really starting to pray for the asteroid to hit Earth, which I'm still there a lot, given the overall consciousness of the world. Where it's hurting as a collective consciousness. We're hurting. I would very much like to be part of the animal kingdom right now. I think they're far superior beings, especially cats. I'm watching my cat sleep herself through life. But it's I forgot my Swiss cheese head. I forgot what I was about to say. Yeah, it's gone. Never mind. It'll come back.
Yeah. No,
oh yes. Yeah. Narrowing it down. Sorry, I'm back. I had a light bulb. So one of the things that actually helped me was to narrow it down to Colorado. So it's Colorado. I was like, okay, as a world consciousness, there's a lot that's not what I would like it to be. But within Colorado, I'm like, I need to actually go investigate what happened in the state, in my backyard. Well, maybe not my backyard, but in the vicinity of my backyard, close enough, like places where I go, and the tangible. They're like I can be around this air. What's the energy? Where do I find the energy? And that was very relieving. So some of the election results in within the state of Colorado were actually give me a little bit of hope that maybe their consciousness is not gonna just collapse and implode in the next 60 seconds, but maybe we get 120.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll get a whole 120 seconds before that. So I think one thing that it kind of hit me immediately and that I've been having a hard time with is just the idea that this is a long-lasting impact. This is one, this election has as all elections have an impact that will inevitably kind of change the course of how things are going. There's enough just kind of worrisome signs on this one that are just hard to swallow. And I think recognizing that we're in for a slog, that we have a lot in front of us, and that's not it's not to say that everybody has to jump in immediately and we have to try and like fix things, but we have a lot of things we're going to have to do if we don't want to slip too far into some
Mm-hmm.
very scary things. There's a lot that kind of scared me about this election because it felt like a lot of like trying to control other people, and then we ended up voting in what feels like it's going to try and control a lot of people in a lot of very oppressive ways. And that's very hard to sit with. And I think just knowing that we're in for it for a while here is
Mm-hmm.
that's the thing that I've had the hardest time like kind of stepping into and fully accepting, is knowing that this is now the long road. The long road ahead of
Mm-hmm.
us is a long road. And that's
I
that's
don't know.
mixed with a bunch of other small emotions of just little frustrations of this or that, or what could have been better, what should have done, what. And I did hear on a podcast at some point this week that there was somebody who's talking about there's some grief for the good that could have been. I mean, there's things that I've been worried about for as long as I can remember being alive. Like climate change was always a worry, and then that felt like it kind of got pushed aside. Then we started to get it more to the front as we watch, the worst hurricane season ever batter the Gulf and batter Florida over and over again. And as we here in Colorado, we just had our first snow of the year lasted for 3 days, which almost never happens. We usually get like maybe a day. In fact, most
Yeah.
snows here don't last for that long. Even
Yeah.
blizzards just happen in a day.
Yeah.
And it was just we're in so many weird weather events. We have all kinds of fires. There's
Mm-hmm.
mudslides. There's whatever else. And so like grieving things like the fact that feels like it's now farther away to be able to help out with any of that.
Yeah.
Um, it's hard to see those take a step where you're like, oh, I don't know if we can, like we've had so many doomsday predictions of like we're past the point of no return here, or we're here. Like, it's hard to see that and realize that the long road is longer and even more difficult. And there's people who are worried about like the good that we could have had that we won't have. Which is a good way of looking at it
Yeah.
too. Is that's a loss. It's easier to see and be worried about the things that are going to be actively be bad,
Mhm.
but there is a loss of things that could have been good that feels
Yeah.
hard to take.
Yeah. That is probably one of the hardest pieces to grieve. Uh, if grieving, it's about the loss of something. A lot of the times, the grieving that at least has felt harder for me, it's not the loss of something concrete that existed, but the loss of something that I hoped would exist. Um, the loss of a dream, the loss of a reality that you could feel so close that you could touch it, and then having to deal with that. And for me, it then becomes an internal turmoil, not just because of the loss of a dream, of a hope, of an expectation of that reality that didn't turn out aligned or the same way. But it becomes a loss of trusting my own intuition, because then there are some things where like, well, but internally that was the direction. So what the hell happened? Energetically, that wasn't the direction. So can I trust my own energy? So now I've got the loss of itself, the loss of what it could have been, and the loss of trusting myself and my own energy and intuition. So it's just this compounding, just, calling. I mean, seriously, I'm looking for the ET telephone right now and I want to get out. Can somebody come and rescue me and get me out? I'm kind of done with this reality around me.
Yeah, that I think you hit on something especially interesting is that this, for one, that's what they talk about when they talk about things like forgiveness. It's not that you forgive another person and you feel okay about them. You have to let go of the future that you thought was going to happen
Yes.
had this other thing not occurred. And that, I think, for me, and it sounds like definitely for you, is definitely accompanied by that feeling of I really thought this was the direction this was going, and
Yeah.
it's at the end of the day kind of a breaking of trust. And in this
Hmm.
case, it feels like a breaking of trust internally because it's like, hey, I thought this was going this way, and I'm not saying that I thought this was gonna be like a clean in the bag, go the other way direction. It was
Yeah.
everything was saying this was gonna be very close. It turned out to not be that close in the other direction, and that's what
Yeah.
was especially surprising. Like
Yeah.
I was expecting a very long, drawn out kind of fight. It was over
Yeah.
by like 10:30, and, at least here. And that was wild. There's
Yeah.
that changing of expectations does lead to this questioning of like, what set of assumptions are not right
Hmm.
about my mental model of the world that were so far off that this jolting and new reality is put in there. And I think
Yeah.
people feel that way when something that you can't expect, like let's say a global pandemic suddenly arises. It's the easiest example for all of us in this generation to know about.
Yes. Yes.
Like we didn't expect that, didn't see that coming, and it changes everything about your life. And that's jarring because and you kind of have to reassemble some amount of your mental models because oftentimes I think as humans we end up not thinking that such jarring changes can happen. I don't know that we could necessarily deal with our day to day if we really accepted the amount of jarring randomness
Oh
that
yeah.
can happen at any given time. But on something like this, where we try our best to predict things, we pull the hell out of the voters and we try and see what's going to happen before it happens. It then becomes jarring when you have this idea that there's some notion of known, even if it's not the decision, but that how it will go. Even that is kind of a thwarted expectation. I think it becomes difficult for us to reckon with, and that's natural but challenging.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a feature of this random universe that we exist in.
It is, and I do believe there's a plan that we're not aware of yet. I think I do believe that there's choices that we make for our own individual realities. But there's also a limit to what we can control within that reality. There are life events that they really have nothing to do with us. So our choice is how we react and respond. It's not on the actual event happening. Um, and I do believe that there's some sort of master plan that we don't know yet. Uh, or something that it will be necessary for it to happen the way it has happened to get to the next stage. Hopefully, the next stage is sometime soon. Uh, Either that or it is asteroid.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we always end up reacting as a species to whatever is happening. I was just actually listening to some non-political podcasts recently about things like the there's all kinds of panic about the effect of phones on society.
Mm.
And there's plenty of reason to be worried. There's plenty of reason to think that like there's some negative impact here. I think that we just don't know yet how to mitigate it. I heard it described at one point as it's essentially like a new infection, a new type of disease, and we'll catch it, we'll get the fever, we will suffer for a bit of time, and then we kind of become more immune to the effects of it. And
Hmm.
and I was listening to these podcasts because they're also talking about things like people used to panic about the advent of the TV, and everything on TV was bad. And if you watch any amount of
Hmm.
TV, it's horrible. And everything that comes out of that is less good than anything before. And that also, like, there were panicking articles that are pretty hilarious to read about the advent of bicycles. People were terrified that
Oh,
this
yes.
was too fast. It was going to stop people
Hmm.
from being able to walk or whatever else they were lamenting the changes of. And we will become more used to how we have to operate
Hmm.
in the world as it changes. And I think we always do that. And in retrospect, then the things that we can pull out of that always become some sort of new source of strength that we would not have had without experiencing the adversity that
Hmm.
we feel. And
Yeah.
I don't mean that as a trying to silver lining. I think everybody should take the time to feel the
Oh,
things that they're going to feel on this. I do think that just in the scope of having seen changes happen enough times, people eventually you get something out of it. That doesn't mean that you prefer that this would have happened. It just means that there is
yeah.
something that will happen because of this that would never have happened otherwise. Um,
Hmm.
does it make up for it? No, it's not
Yeah.
about making up for it.
No,
It's just about
no.
the reality of the situation that this will inevitably change things, and not all of that will be bad. And there will be things that we will never could never have done if we weren't exposed to this level of
Hmm.
adversity and this level of some kind of change that we weren't expecting, that we didn't expect to have to
Hmm.
work into our life plans, our day plans, and our emotional landscape.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's the piece. I actually read an article. I think it was from The Guardian. And I don't know if I read it or somebody shared it because thankfully there's a community of grievers that find each other. And in that article, they actually pointed out all the things that um, have happened. Uh, I guess when you know, thanks to or due to the election results 8 years ago,
Mhm.
and how all those things would probably not have happened. There are positive movements, there are positive policies, there are positive awareness, there's positive um, direction uh, that is, a little bit more towards equality and respect. And and making the world a better place for everybody uh, equally. And and so that's it was actually one of in the grieve, that article helped a lot because it was is pointing out like, hey, it's not just one event. Things can actually happen due to that event. There was actually a show called The Good Fight, which is a spin-off of The Good Wife, from a few years ago. And in one of their um alternate universe. Well, they actually created an alternate universe in I think the last season, which was a little weird, but an alternate universe. And in that alternate, oh no, no, not sorry, I, Swiss cheese brain. Now I remember. One of the main characters actually fell and hit her head as she was in this dream state. That's when she felt like she saw the effects of this alternate universe. And in this case, Hillary Clinton had won in that
Mm.
alternate universe. And that inciting incident had then spiraled all sorts of not unwanted consequences that actually made things worse for a lot of groups and people. And so it was kind of back to like, oh, wait, there is a path, even when the inciting incident may be a little bit traumatizing.
And even when the anxiety incident is not traumatizing, it doesn't mean that all
Exactly.
the outcomes are good. I
Exactly.
remember um, moving to New York. I was super excited to go. I mean, I wanted to be in like a big city for as long as I can remember. I think when I was like 5, my parents had taken me to San Francisco because we were out visiting some family near there. And I remember being enamored with cities from that point on. And every time we got to visit one, every time we were there, it was always incredible to be in there. And of course, New York has its own extra layer of just incredible energy that comes out of being there.
Hmm.
And I remember moving and being super excited to be there. And That was a good inciting incident. There's no getting around the fact that that's not all positives. There's
Hmm.
lots of jokes about
Yeah.
like you go travel to escape your problems, and you find out that you're the problem, so you just kind of take them around everywhere you go.
Hmm.
And there's some of that is just true. You go to a new location, and yes, you've changed
Yeah.
locations, but not all of it is positive. And it's not to say that it's a bad place to be or it's not the right thing to do. But things that happen that are seemingly positive on the surface do
Mhm.
not just have endlessly good results, and seemingly negative do not just have
Yeah.
endlessly negative results. And none of that makes that pain to experience better. None of that is to say that,
No.
we can all just brush this off and be fine. We are going to have to do so much. Um,
Yes. Yes.
that
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's unfortunate.
Yes. It is. It is very unfortunate. And especially as humans, we don't tend to change when unless we're deeply disturbed most of the
Hmm.
times. We can grow into a place where we will tweak and change for the sake of growth, not for the sake of escaping something that deeply disturbed us.
Hmm.
But that also is higher consciousness. Getting to that point is higher consciousness of deciding I am consciously choosing discomfort. I'm consciously hunting discomfort in a way so that I can let go of the comfort that's holding me back. Um, and I know it is not going to be easy and it's going to feel harder than staying where I am. And I'm not going to wait until I'm deeply disturbed and there's no choice to do that. I'm constantly going to look for those opportunities and putting myself in that state of growth through discomfort and fear. And so the but typically, that there is a tendency to stay where we are, to stay in the status quo, and to really look at like the devil I know, it's better than the devil I don't know, and I don't know, the unknown is way too scary. So yeah, this is not great, but I'll take it until we don't have a choice. Until, like Oprah says, the universe whispered, you ignored it, and now a brick wall is falling on your head. So now you don't have a choice.
Yes, that's it's hilarious you bring that up in that way, particularly because politically across the world and just now in our country, incumbents have done terribly. They've been voted out of
Mhm.
office. People are looking for change. So in this case, it was not waiting and sitting with the devil you know. It is that there was something there are forces, macroeconomic and climate forces that are strong enough that people are done with the status quo. And there's a thousand absolutely understandable reasons to be
Yeah.
so sick of so many of the things that are happening. And I think that that is probably a good lesson to take from this is that we weren't going to change until we're deeply disturbed. And the fact that we did go for a seeming change here, even though it's kind of a regression,
Yeah.
a seeming change, uh, does speak to the amount of widespread pain that
Yeah.
is are already present. And I would
Yes.
argue personally that I don't think this is a good move, and that's not going to help the
Oh
amount
no, the
of
pain
pain.
is gonna get worse. We're not done being
Yes.
disturbed.
And we just
Yes.
gave ourselves a fever on top of already having a cough, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Like
Or
that's
or the
where we're at.
plague.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, at
Yeah.
this point, I'm just waiting for the next pandemic. If we're gonna repeat history, then everybody bring out your masks. You know you have them. Because we're repeating history. So give it a couple of years at most, and we're gonna have a whole other pandemic.
I remember you sending me an Instagram on that like a couple of years ago. It was just a little after COVID restrictions started to wane a little bit, and it was something along the lines of like, it's the year is 2054, and you reach into your coat pocket and you pull out a surgical mask, and you laugh to yourself, remembering the pandemic as you pull on your gas mask and walk outside.
Yes. Yes. Well, and it may very well be where we're headed. I mean,
Mhm.
I think that nature is way stronger than we are. I think we can try to control it, and it is going to keep slapping us back. And at some point, it's going to get sick of it and really slap us back. Because we are destroying things that we should not be destroying. We're destroying our survival.
Mhm.
And also we are impacting the well-being of so much more than our own survival, that at some point, Earth has existed way longer than we have by a lot. And I think my kids at some point we're talking about like, oh, like, what do you think humans will be like, 400 years from now? I'm like, humans won't be here 400 years from now. That's what I think. Unless something radically changes, we are headed for extinction of our own doing.
I think that's not so far off. I think that
No.
yeah, we one of the things that in lighter moments I do find genuinely entertaining and truly like it makes me laugh sometimes. Not in these times, but occasionally when I'm not totally overwhelmed by it, is that the the human species is so absolutely incredible. I mean, we are a species that evolved to be able to create complex societies. We have like buildings, building codes, giant governments. We have a global like it is way beyond our scope to actually comprehend to the point where that is part of the problem. We have outgrown ourselves a little bit. But
Yeah.
we are the species that is able to adjust this fast, adjust this rapidly, and we figured out and knew that there is evolution that happens that created like got to our species, and we are so far there. We also can ignore it and say that that isn't
Yes.
true and decide that these things aren't real. And we can know that things are dangerous for our survival while continuing to
Yes.
invest in them. And as a whole, we can be so brilliant and so able to absolutely kneecap ourselves. It is
Oh,
truly
yes.
one of the funniest and most horrific portions of being
It
human.
is. It is. And it's all for this obsession of power and money. Because
Hmm.
that's really what it is. When they say, you watch movies and they always say follow the money, this is the same case. It's follow the money. Every decision is made of some number that, sorry, about when we hit the end of our journey, which we all do, that is not an option. It
Hmm.
doesn't matter.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter what number we hit. And so it's pointless. This is where as a species, like we're hurting ourselves because we're trying to build on something that it's not a thing. It's not a thing that will last. That thing won't last 400 years.
Yeah.
That thing won't last, the day your the heart stops.
We are so good at investing in those patterns, though. Those things like
Yeah.
the stock market. We're like, we have to make it grow. We have to make it grow, and it
Yeah.
over and over and over again corrects and has to come back down and
Yes.
has to blow up. And yeah,
Yeah.
maybe it'll do it in a new and absolutely spectacular fashion here sometime soon, or sometime later. It'll happen at some point. There'll be some kind of correction, but we always reinvest and then get super focused on this. Like, yeah, but I can just grow it for just a little bit longer, but just a little longer. But I could
Yeah.
probably just keep going for a
Yeah.
little bit more, and then we inevitably run ourselves off of a cliff. And it's I think you hit on an interesting point of being money and power because I think money is just a proxy for power in this case.
Yes.
We
Yes.
use it that way,
Yes.
so we gather it so we can have some power, and that's definitely just a natural kind of evolution piece. We
Yeah.
fought for status, we continue to fight for status. That's why
Nope.
it's terrifying to us when we feel like we're losing it or we feel like we're other people have it over us. It's a very challenging biological experience because it was such a necessity in tribes to understand your status and try to increase it enough to increase your survival odds. It is
Hmm.
truly just stepping on our survival buttons over and over and over again.
Yes.
And there's books where they talk about like people will comment that moths occasionally fly circles around candles and then end up burning themselves. And it's all just a big evolutionary misfire because they are used to navigating by the light of the moon, which
Hmm.
that's why they can continually turn on. And that's where they would go. But they were not meant for there being a source of light that exists
Hmm.
that is stable and so close to them that they're continually turning right next to this flame or
Yeah.
next to a light bulb, and they're just used to like navigating that way. That's how I feel about sometimes our human evolution is we were there to be status driven creatures, and that was something that worked at a time when we were so much
Hmm.
smaller than we were. And I'm not even going to say necessarily that it worked. It just was enough that we could continue to survive. It wasn't like the
Yeah.
prime the best way to do things. It just was the way that worked.
Hmm.
Just like navigating by the moon isn't the best way to do things, but it works. but it works enough that people survived. And then we way outgrew ourselves. We
Yeah.
expanded society so big we can't even possibly comprehend the scale of it. Like we were meant to be able to digest about 150 people total, and we have
Mhm.
8 billion on the planet. There's no
Yeah.
way we can understand this just in our actual brains and actual comprehend what is happening. And we have so naturally outgrown,
Mhm.
and we're seeing the consequences of still having that mindset that was built for something that we are so not in.
Yeah, that's true. And what hurts consciousness, what hurts the fact that we are one consciousness. We are all connected as energy, as part of energy and as energy sources. That what hurts is the fact that our grab for power, our grab for status, it's done in certain cases, in a lot of cases, um, by causing suffering for others. So it's back to being that moth. It's like, but we're all connected. And we're one consciousness. This is not going to last. This grabbing power by hurting others, by diminishing the well-being of others, by disregarding and actively going against the well-being of others, it's only going to turn itself on us. That's going to be the light bulb, the flame of the moth that burns us. But that notion is it's not thought about. Like the immediate need for power. It's it's very it's really against that, which doesn't make any sense to me. Which is why when I go to a healer, an energy healer, and they tell me like you're struggling in this lifetime because you're not from here, you're an alien. I'm like, yes, thank you, because I don't understand what's going on around me. I don't understand what's
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah. I think I don't think that that's I think true. I think we do just grab these small pieces and it's so intangible to see the larger results, but it's also so in some ways it's intangible, but it's also tangible if you look at the larger system. You might not know
Yes.
exactly what the impact of every decision is, but you can see the long broad strokes of what's happening if you continue to make small power grabs, what happens at the end of that,
Yes.
or if you continue to hold power over, what happens at the end of that. And
Yes.
there was one message that started to come out at the towards the end of the campaign that I thought was well put and needs to be better understood, like on a species level, is just that having power over people, having control over
Hmm.
things is not power.
Yeah.
And Brene Brown will always talk about power over versus
Yes.
power with, but I think it's very much a position of weakness when you need to do things like
Yes.
control the media. It's a point of weakness when you
Yes.
need to do things like control other people and to put them
Yeah.
down. I'm not saying that doesn't have dramatically terrible consequences.
Hmm.
You can exact horrific things with that power over mindset. Um, but we do need to understand, I think, better as a species, and it needs to be said more often that that is not actual power. That's weakness.
Hmm.
That you're
Yeah.
just trying to hold on to and desperately like oppress other people to get to hold on to
Yeah.
some amount of like control, and that's not actual power. That is continual flailing weakness, which any Psych 101 course could teach you. But that's
Yeah.
where we're at.
Yeah. It is. It's true. And so in this reality, which we can't change because we can't control it, what part of the grieving, or part of what's hard to process, is how how do we contribute? How does our contribution matter in any of this at the individual level? Is there is a contribution to the overall consciousness, but how do we feel that our lives have that we are providing contribution, that our lives, our presence creates a situation in a world that would not be created otherwise, and we use that to sustainably keep going.
That's the million trillion dollar question. I would love to. I don't. It's easy to feel despair in that. it's easy to feel like, an individual contribution isn't as important, isn't going to be the thing that makes the difference. And it does push things. This is again a harder like big picture thing to see. If you're pushing a few things, you may never know that that's the thing that ends up making a difference. You may never see that, and so
Mhm.
it's really hard to hold on to that individual contribution. I personally don't do a good job of it. I have no idea how to hold on to that. I lose a lot of faith quickly, and I don't know how people do stick to it. So what? I would turn that back on to you. How does one know that? How does one get there? As I don't, I've had moments of seeing pieces of it. I have a very hard time sustaining that.
I would say what has helped me is really, really zooming in to what do I want to be remembered by or as, or both, by and as. Because, to quote Maya Angelou, it's not what we do that people will remember. It's not what we say. It is how we make them feel. So how we make people feel, or how we can't make people feel, but how that the environment that we create so that people can have certain feelings because we create that type of environment, that kind of space. It's something that stays with them and could possibly influence a different action that then will determine different reaction and will determine different paths of a journey that we don't know. Uh, for the most part, we probably won't know. I mean, if we're open and honest and have the courage to, we can share how people help us feel so that they know what their contribution is in our lives. That's fairly rare, probably more rare than it needs to be. And so, we know that there's an end. We know that that's non-negotiable. We don't know when it comes. And so, it, you know, I zoom into the day, the moment, to the point of thinking like at the end of today, if today is the day that my number's up, will I be, will I feel like I've contributed in a way, will I feel that people will remember me as or by something that made their lives a little bit better, that maybe they can carry with them and pay it forward. Will it feel like I've done something worthwhile because of what I'm leaving in people's hearts? Because, like we can be the ones that invented VHS, and then look at today and be like, well, that was a waste of time. And it wasn't, because it was necessary to get to here. But if we look for the tangible, if we look for the thing is gonna go away. Um, and so what stays in our heart is what goes into consciousness, and what goes into consciousness is what spans time and space, because we have no idea where it's gonna go beyond what we did.
Yeah, I like that way of looking at it. I think there's maybe just a huge game of acceptance to be played in knowing that we can't fully know it. We never
Hmm.
will. And
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
not on anybody's fault. I mean, you can
Yeah.
have had a very small interaction with somebody that you've entirely forgotten about that made a big
Yeah.
difference for them, and you don't even know that it was just a stranger you happened to know very briefly on an elevator or whatever for 2 minutes, and that was it.
Yeah.
And it might have made an impact on them, and you'll truly never know.
Yeah.
And that maybe is just a level of acceptance to reach. And I do like the idea of just expressing the gratitude we feel for the people around
Mhm.
us. More often, I try and do that all of the time. Every job I've ever left, I try and like tell the people that that I really appreciated whatever help was given. I really appreciated whatever they did. It's one of the best parts of coaching is that you get a chance to tell people what you see, because when you notice some people making their own shifts and making their own changes, you get a chance to explicitly note for them like, wow, it's really you really
Mhm.
seem to have a lot of awareness on this, and it's incredible that you have the ability to like look at how you as a person here plugged into that and you leaned on a natural gift here or whatever. And it's just really it's really nice to be able to do that. That's something I've tried to do for a lot of life, but I definitely could continue to improve at. And that's a good one to do, just to have people maybe raise the awareness of what that the things they're doing are impacting things around them all of the time, and see how far I guess it can go, because it's hard to
Hmm.
keep that faith as if you're trying to work that in something that makes a change to the things that you see in the headlines. Um,
Hmm. Yeah.
it can sometimes be hard to hold that. But it doesn't mean that it's not there, and everything you see in the headlines is only made possible by a
Yeah.
thousand of those interactions.
Yeah, exactly. And so when we think about what is it that we can control, which especially the last week we've been slapped around on what we cannot control quite a bit. It's really what we can control is how we show up. That's the only thing we can control. We have zero control over anything else. We have control over how we show up, and even that we stumble and it's bumpy when we let our lower consciousness and autopilot take over. But that's really what we truly can control. And so, if we look at it as from an equation point of view, we can't influence outcomes. That's not something we can control. We can't even influence action. We can't control action. We can influence feelings, and feelings determine actions, which determine outcomes. So that's where I go back to how, if I focus on how I show up, and that creates the beginning of a spark of something, then maybe the outcome will be what I would hope it is. And most times it will be something way beyond and above what I thought it could be, because that's where my control ends. I just had a conversation with another client a couple of days ago where he asked me, like, how do I know what I should be doing about situations when I would like to see something happen, but I don't know if I have control over it, or I'm trying to decide which path to follow. And my answer was like, I can't tell you what to do. That's you have to decide what to do. That's not, I can tell you what I would do, but that doesn't help you at all. Because that's me and that's my own decisions. That's my own consciousness. That's my own way of looking at, like, how did I show up today? And is it acceptable to me how I showed
Mhm.
up today? But what I told him, like, one thing that you could think about is when you go to sleep, can you sleep based on how you showed up? Or will you feel that you've missed out on doing something, or you took inactions when you wanted to take action, or you can't really accept who you were before you go to sleep, and it's disturbing that piece of thinking again, like, if tonight is my number, I'm okay with that. That's that's it. And what that is, it's will probably change multiple times a day, will probably change every night, what allows you to fall asleep and be at peace one day could be the total opposite the next day, because of all the things we cannot control around us.
That's a really good way of looking at it. I think there is a huge amount of truth to the idea that at the end of the day, we really only have ourselves that we're answering to. I mean, that's the person that we stare at when we're in the mirror, and when we're at those last moments of the day when you're just going to bed at night, or can't sleep,
Hmm.
whichever way it goes.
Hmm.
Um, that's the person we're answering to, and that's a good thing to remember. It is the one thing we can do some control over, and to try and remember that uh, that where our range of control really is, like that, how much we can really we can continue to show up as we want to show up, and there's only so much we can do beyond that. We can't control how people are going to react. We can just do our best to create a situation to hopefully elicit positive reactions, and we can't control whether people actually do it. We can put the baton out there. We can't get people to pick it up. And they
Hmm.
probably will. A lot of people will respond well, and some people won't. And that's
Yep.
just part of the reality of being alive, being human, and being with other
Hmm.
people. And that's Not even a necessarily a bad thing. It can be a frustrating thing,
Hmm.
but it's not a bad thing. And and it doesn't make it less true, regardless whether it's frustrating or not.
Yeah, yeah. So the question really is like when we are in those moments of frustration, when we do lose hope, when we are in darkness, when we do feel like nothing we do really matters, or we're unsure about what our contribution is, if it is any, if we're contributing at all. What do we do? How do we find the light in those moments? How do we how do we remember that when everything around us is dark is because we may be the light?
It's an excellent question. I've been in a bit of a hole on that for the last couple of months, just generally, and I don't know that I have an answer for that. I have things to try. I have plenty of exercises I know of and things that I can try and lean back on. I think that, you know, one thing that sometimes helps is just reevaluating your own values and understanding of whether
Hmm.
you're leaning into them or you're not, and if not, then what can you do to re-engage those. Um, yeah, for me, like one of the grieving portions of the election is that I think a huge value for me is fairness. It's
Mm.
something that even when
Yeah.
I was like 3 years old or 2 years old and couldn't quite
Hmm.
speak yet, my parents like to tell the story of how they were trying to punished my older brother for having done something, and I stepped in the middle because I was and tried to tell them off and told them they couldn't speak to him like that or some version of that. And I think that's just been an ingrained
Hmm.
feeling that there is some unfairness. And one of the hard parts about an election like this, result like this, is that one of the reasons I didn't want us to end up in this is that there is a dramatic amount of, and that's why I also really hate the control over and power over dynamics, is that it's just not, it's inherently unfair and not okay to treat other people like that. And I feel that at my
Hmm.
core, that is a double-edged sword when you face a moment like this where it feels like something. I'm not saying that the election wasn't fair. I think it was that's it, you know, the votes were counted.
It's
I don't think that that
fact.
was an illicit count. I don't think there was like an unfairness in how this was done. But I do think that the results of this are going to create a lot of unfairness that didn't need to
Hmm.
happen for people, and that's really hard to do. And so, in leaning back into values, I guess it's trying to figure out how to encourage or create some structures of that, and that then, you know, spirals pretty quickly into how do you make that impact a little bit larger, or how do you, and if not larger, how do you even just get started, so that you feel like you're doing something in your immediate circle
Hmm.
to honor that. And I don't know that I have answers for that, but that would be one place maybe to start, is to evaluate your own values and whether you are
Hmm.
living in them. Um,
Well, what can you
I don't know.
control? So if you look at your values and you're wondering if I'm living in them, what can you control about that?
You can control what you do. You can control what you choose
Hmm.
to do. It's easier said than done.
Yeah. It is. It is much easier said than done. You can control how you show up.
Mm-hmm.
Do you show up
You
with
control your show.
fairness? Do you show up with curiosity? Because that's another one that's a big core value. Do you show
Mm-hmm.
up per your core value?
Yeah.
That's
This is
the end of what you can control. Literally the end of what you can control.
the other thing that I personally struggle with, and I assume a lot of people listening also struggle with this, is there's some amount of back and forth, and it is at the end of the day a bit of a guess and a bit of a judgment call of how much do you lean in, how much do you rest up,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
we're all going to need both. We're all going to need
Yeah.
both, and
Yeah.
we needed that before. We'll always need that no matter what happens in
Hmm.
life. We're always going to have times where we need to protect our energy so we can continue to use it, and not burn ourselves out. And we have times where we need to lean in because we have to push on the things
Hmm.
that we
Hmm.
feel are important to push on. And just I've been having a hard time finding that one this month. Just for a number of personal reasons went entirely wrong. We had a couple losses in the family, like multiple, and have had other just health issues going on with like pets, and it's been just a very emotionally draining month. On top of, you know, short of all the external factors that we're discussing here, and I have a hard time finding that balance personally, and I think other people
Mhm.
probably struggle
Mhm.
similarly. Like
Mhm.
how much is okay to step back and take a break when you know there's things that need to be done, when you know there's things that are active fires, so to speak, on your life. How to know when to take that break and when to step back in. And I think we can all get better at like listening to our bodies on that. And there are some people I know that
Mhm.
are very good at that. Um, I was raised not to listen to any piece of that and to mostly feel a lot of guilt over taking things. So that
Mhm.
makes it particularly difficult.
Guilt over
But
taking?
yes,
Interesting.
yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, guilt over taking that time. If there's something that needs to be done,
Oh,
that's
okay.
more
So taking the
important.
time to, okay.
Yeah,
Yes. Okay.
yeah. That if there's something to be done, you have to work on that first, or if there's work to be done, do that.
Oh,
That
yes,
was
that's a
an
fairly
okay thing.
fairly common, yes,
Yeah,
narrative. Yes.
you can
Yeah.
see why people do that in schools. You can see how you try and like
Yeah.
instill some discipline for
Yeah.
school kids to like do homework before you're
Yeah.
out and playing, and you don't want to like you want to instill some amount of responsibility.
Hmm.
Um, I'm not blaming people for instilling that. I think that's a good thing
Hmm.
to teach. I think that that didn't work for me personally because I ended up taking that so far to heart that I neglected a lot of other things, a lot of self-care along that. And I hope other people are taking the time to do
Hmm.
some of that or knowing when to do it, or better at doing that. As it turns out, life is not, life doesn't stop. Doesn't matter what you do. Like work is
Hmm.
very easy. Like in school, you can go burn yourself out on a semester, but you'll get a break. So you kind of know when the end point is. That's not true with work. You'll have a project that will start to overlap with the next project when you're doing that project. I mean, there's not going to be a time when it stops. You have to be the one to raise your hand, pull a break, and
Hmm.
choose to do that. I think that's I struggle with finding the ways to do that. I assume that other people have similar struggles with when to
Hmm.
set that boundary and how to set that boundary. And there's clearly a lot of impetus to push people to continue to work. And I hope that people don't get burnt out on that, but not only on the work of whatever their job is, but the work of
Hmm.
life and what that will require.
Yeah. It's true. Yeah, finding that balance, I would say it's a lifelong journey. I don't know. I don't think we ever really get there and we're done. It's not a medal. Uh,
Yeah.
we don't get to the point of like, oh no, I know exactly how to balance what I can control and what I can't around me, how to balance uh, different aspects of life, and how to show up with integrity to my core values every minute of the day. Because if I think about, you said that one of your key ones is fairness. Well, then the question really is, what does fairness look like in these situations to me? And what does fairness look like in how I show up for others? And finding that combination, it's gonna be challenging every time. It's gonna be a
Yes.
little bit different every time. Because it
Yes.
could be that one day the fairness scale is more about me, and some days the fairness scale is I can take on more to help others, to show up for others. It's not the same every day.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. That's a good reminder for all of us for life in general, and especially anybody who's feeling a little also worn out at the end of
Yeah,
this week post election. But that this
yeah,
is all going to change day to day, and that's okay. It's
yeah,
better to accept the change and know that it's going to change than think that no, but I really miss yesterday, or I really hope it's better
yeah,
tomorrow. Like that, those can all be true,
yeah,
and what's really true is that you're here now, and this
yes,
is your choice.
yeah.
And it's also good to remember at that point there's not really a wrong choice.
Hmm.
We can do our best to try and
Hmm.
avoid things that create, as long as we are doing this towards what
Hmm.
our actual value set is. And it's very hard to sometimes see that, and it's very hard to do that if we're lower on energy. It doesn't mean that that's really the one thing we get to do, and it's always the present choice.
Hmm.
And as much as we may grieve the past or wish for it or hope for the future or grieve the future,
Hmm.
either whatever direction it's going, as much as we may be tied up into that, we really only get the choice in what's happening now.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's
yeah,
always, always, always true. Because
yeah.
now is always
It's
now.
true. Yes, it's so true. I was talking to a coach friend of mine, and sharing some current struggles, and she asked me, she's like, "What would you like to see happen?" I'm like, well, the only thing I can control is how I show up. So I would like to see that I can show up differently from autopilot. I would like to see that I show up how I want to show up per my values today, not how I've been conditioned to or where I default to in these types of situations, because that's the easier way out. That's the muscle that exists. Like I want to stop that muscle. I can't control what other people do, so that's not in the what would you like to see happen? Because it's I can control it anyway, but I can't control how I what my perspective is. I can control how I look at a situation, which then will determine how I show up. That's the change I can control.
And maybe it's not terrible to know that you would like people to show up differently or that you would like
Oh,
changes to
yes.
happen for other people. I think
Yes.
that maybe that can be a helpful starting point to get us to back to
Yes.
that singular
Yes.
action because
Yes.
it tells us what we want to see. Now we
Yes.
cannot get attached to that outcome because obviously we
Yeah.
cannot control that. Like if we
Yeah.
get attached to that, we're setting ourselves up for
Yeah.
pain regardless. And that's not going to help in the long term because then you're going to suffer the consequences both
Yeah.
ways and you're going to feel more tired. But it can be helpful to consider, like, yeah, I would like this to be this way. What does that tell you about your values? What does it tell you about what's
Exactly.
possible? And then that can
Exactly.
help you work backwards into, okay, yeah, now that
Exactly.
I really consider it from that lens, this situation is now untenable. I have to leave this specific situation, which is oftentimes when people are in coaching sessions, and especially when it comes to
Yeah.
things like career transitions, that's what it comes down to. There's always frustrating aspects of a job.
Hmm.
So the real question is, can you get down and get clear on what your threshold is for how
Yeah.
much action you can take or are willing to take, and how much
Yeah.
action is going to be, how much, what would determine that this is no longer a viable option to stay in
Yeah.
and you to
Yeah.
leave? Because
Yeah.
it's always option
Yeah.
two.
Yeah. And that's a great distinction. That's not to say that you shouldn't wish for things to happen in a certain way and drive your action and thoughts and how you show up in that direction. I mean, I want a healthy planet. I want, that's the action. I want, complete fairness and equality. I want, humans to thrive as a community. And all these things to happen, within nature. I want consciousness to be a hell of a lot higher, and not be, all about power and grabbing and power grabbing and power over. And so how it's that then turning around to I can't control how what other people do and I can't control the outcomes. I have wishes for the outcomes and behaviors. But what I can control and do is how I show up in this. What I can control
Mhm.
and do is think, when things are happening around me that don't actually impact me directly because I am in a privileged situation or in a type of situation where that's pretty much never going to touch me on a day-to-day basis in a way that's painful. That's when I can stop and say, like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that's not happening to me. It matters that's happening to anyone.
Mhm.
That's what matters. And so I have a role in that future.
Not to dive incredibly somewhat politically, but they did a study at one point where they were comparing. I'm not going to say what they were comparing, but they were trying to compare the two political parties. And the definition of conservative versus liberal was really how wide you cast your circle of empathy.
Yeah.
The more they were defining liberalism as based on like the wider um, net that you're casting for people that you
Mm-hmm.
feel and understand their or try to understand their experience for. And on the conservative end of things, it's a smaller circle. We could obviously dive deep onto the implications of that and the truth or not
Yeah.
truth of that, but regardless of how you decide to split up the parties, that is an interesting way of looking at things,
Mhm.
and it is a good reminder that that circle is really important of deciding and still indulging in and knowing that it can be a very painful process to keep that circle wide,
Yeah.
and knowing that
Yes.
it is the ultimate privilege to be able to turn away when other people
Yeah.
cannot turn away because it is their experience.
Yeah.
That is the real definition of privilege at the end of the day, is not
Hmm.
having to care about things that other people will have to care about and will
Yeah.
get no choice in not caring about. So if you can keep that circle of empathy wide, you can keep that understanding, and there is still some self-protection in that because you can also be exhausted by keeping that and
Oh,
understanding and
yes.
feeling that for everybody. So know when to rest up so that you can keep that
Hmm.
net wide so you can help when it needs
Yeah.
to be done.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yes. And in that spectrum, my circle of empathy is it's enough to get us to Mars. Let's say it that way. I'm the type of person that I will physically feel pain at the thought of somebody else being in pain.
I think I think that might be more true for people than they will admit. And I think that there's a
Yeah.
lot of times we
Yeah.
condition ourselves to lower that because it can be incredibly painful to be feeling all of those things all
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah.
And maybe there's some default settings, maybe there's some amount of like here or there. I definitely don't think it's a fixed thing. I think everybody can learn
Mm-hmm.
to expand or
Mm-hmm.
contract it.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that there's a lot of understandable reasons that it feels good to sometimes shrink that.
Yeah.
And back to value set, how much are you willing to accept that? And I
Yeah.
don't feel
Yeah.
able to accept that personally. I think there are people who maybe are able to accept some of
Yeah.
that, but it is I find it difficult to allow for that knowing and not
Mhm.
trying to act on it. And I think that's one of the reasons that
Yeah.
people reduce that knowing so that they don't have to feel that impetus to action. And I get that. I don't think that's, I think there is some helpful self-preservation in that
Mm-hmm.
occasionally, but when we
Yeah.
make that the habit, we also disconnect and we lose the
Yeah.
ability
Yeah.
to help and to affect the change that we are hoping to see.
Yes. I think that's one of the outcomes is the effect of the change we want to see is diminished because we're not participating in it
Mm-hmm.
fully. And not to say that you have to participate in it fully all the time because that's burnout. It's you still need your own oxygen mask on.
Yes. Yeah, if you don't have any
And
oxygen, like this doesn't matter anyway. You're out of the
no,
game. You're unconscious.
yes,
So
yes, exactly. So it's that balance that changes all the time. So back to core values and figuring out like if we go to bed at night tonight, can I go to bed feeling like I have not no regrets, but minimal regrets, which a lot of the studies on regrets are about inaction, not action. We regret
Mhm.
the things we haven't done, not the things we have done.
Yeah,
More than the things we have done. I'm sure there's plenty of things I have done that I regret doing, but it's mostly the things I haven't done.
those are the things that haunt us, I think, much more.
Yes.
Things we
Yeah.
haven't done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a good point too, because it's not like that. That's a good question to ask yourself, but it's not like that you should be aiming for. If I'm not answering that with an affirmative yes every single day, I'm failing.
Yeah.
Like, no, just telling you that
Yeah.
you need to,
Yeah.
you might need to make some changes. You might need to
Yeah.
readjust. You might, like, there should be no expectation, and there's never going to be a time where you feel like you're perfectly
Hmm.
on top of that at all times.
No. No. That's not a thing. So yeah. Well, the future is really up to us in whatever way we can do it.
Stick together, talk it out,
Yep.
and good luck.
Yes.
Give yourself some breaks when you need them. Step
Hmm.
back in.
Yes. Yep. Thanks for listening.
Thanks.